Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Craig. I am the publisher here at Hidden Timber Books. I want to welcome you today on a lovely Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Just to give you a little bit of information about this small press author reading series that we do, it's really an opportunity to bring readers and authors together from near and far and introduce you to some wonderful work and some small presses. Some work that you might not see out in the mainstream, maybe you will, but really it's just a chance for you to meet some of your favorite authors. And today I am really excited to have one of my favorite authors, Beth Kephart, here to talk about her memoir and essays, Wife, Daughter, Self. And I have like the clean version. That's a book I'm going to share with a friend. And then I have my nice beat up one that I've been marking up and saving pages and all sorts of stuff. So it's a really beautiful book. Um, and we're going to have a chance to hear a little bit from the book, talk about it, but also do some other fun stuff, talk about literature and art and how those things work together. So, Beth Kephart is a National Book Award finalist. She's an NEA grant winner. She's an author of so many wonderful books. I have several of hers here, from picture books to middle grade to craft books to memoir. I'm amazed and I love seeing whatever news pops up about her next project in the social media feed that I have. It's just really cool to see that, she's an author who doesn't limit herself to one place, just kind of lets that creativity roll however it will. And I really love that about her. So I am honored to have her here. And I think you're going to really enjoy this hour. So thank you, Beth.
Well, Christy, thank you. Christy, you do so much for so many in your work, in your life as a publisher, and your own workshops and the way that you teach. And you also we've had the chance to interact in so many different ways. I feel as if we've actually sat in a room together, and someday I hope we can. I'm really happy to be here with this book. I wanted to start by just telling you about something that those of you on social media might have seen from me, but my friend Katrina Kennison, who's a wonderful writer. She was the editor of Best American Short Stories for a long time. She has her own books, all of that. She asked her readers on her blog the question, "What have you made this year?" I'm looking down because I'm looking at my phone. It's on my phone, and she reflected herself. What did I make out of this year that just went by? And it took her some time, and she began to think, I've made tracks in the snow. I made a wood pile. I made a bed. I made a gift. I made a sandwich. And she wrote beautifully, and then she took these photographs and she invited those who read her blog to ask themselves and to answer, what have you made this year? And to me, the responses to this, both what Katrina created and what emerged, I mean, I kept crying every time I came back to more and more responses. There's more than 130 responses. I would really encourage you to look. But they were everything from, I made a safe space for a new dog. I made a new baby. Um, I made 8 million um, cells for my sister's bone marrow transplant. And this just glorious recalibration of what the year that just went by has meant or could mean if we just look at it in a not what did we achieve way, but what did we make? What did we yield? And I just point that out because books are really wonderful, of course, and I believe in them, of course, but there's also so much that we do in our lives that is intangible, and yet is really the way that our sense of who we are and what value is may ultimately be best defined. We're on this screen here because my husband is the one who figures out the technology all the time, and we're going to do this. I am doing this, but he created the slideshow is his work. And I'm going to read 4 pages from this book, Wife, Daughter, Self, the chapter called Payne's Gray. And then you get to watch his beautiful images. He works in clay. He works as a photographer. He's worked on books with me. He's worked to create juncture workshops with me, as Julie knows, because she's been with us. And we're going to see if I can make this work. And that's always the key. Here we go. I'd gone and fallen in love with the wrong man, said my mother. She hadn't met him yet, but there were facts. He was Salvadoran, not my country, Catholic, not my religion, a subway tunnel singer, I shouldn't have mentioned that, an architect who would rather be an artist. What sensible daughter marries a rather be artist? And then there was the limit of his wealth, a beat up Honda Civic that, last time I'd ridden in it, had seized to a halt in the longest stretch of the sketchiest part of town. But his watercolors, I said, his stories, his art. It was all there in his room in West Philly, laid out to dry. Fabulous landscapes on buckled arches paper, Winsor and Newtons of ochre and dusk red, oversized one-off postcards sending news of someone else's planet. I don't know which words to put down here first, how I saw his work, how it made me feel, craggy and leaning back and billowing with time. When Bill left for graduate school, he had no money for a phone and less time to write. He mailed me watercolors instead, washes of color in painfully occasional response to the voluminous ink bleed of my letters. When he returned 2 years later, we built a life. My work on my pages, his work on his pages, a child soon enough, my mother in her eventual and then steadfast thrall of him. From poetry to fiction to essays to memoir to fiction to prose poems to categorical breaks for me. From paper to plaster to canvas to Kodachrome to the slick screen to the mud of the earth for him, and oxides and stains. There were years when I might have worried less, years when the demands of living exceeded the art of life, years that flurried on too fast, but every time I saw my husband's art, I fell in love again. Art is a tangle. Art is a mood. Art is the conversation you will or will not have. And there were more years and more art before the paintings and photos and sketches and smudges were not just drying in the near air or hanging on the sidewall or slouching in a black frame. They were tricking, twisting, wrangling their way into the stories that I tried to tell. I wrote The Wisdom of a Garden, but the memoir was more wise for having been relieved by Bill's photographs. I wrote a crooked little fable populated by crooked little creatures, but everything was far more fabulously crooked, more distilled, more true, when Bill drew the characters to life. I wrestled with the line lengths of a poem that featured a hawk until Bill saw the hawk out there on the closest branch and took its photograph, then gave it to me so that the shape of that bird might become the shape of my poem. It did. I wrote about truth and how truth gets made, but by then it was abundantly obvious to me Bill's idiosyncratic drawings, his ghostly photographs, his rubbed out sketches would make my point better or make a different point. And now when I teach, I bring Bill's art with me and spread it out across the table and say to my students, 5 minutes, 5 sentences. Within the blink of that writing eye, my students fabricate stories sprung from my husband's fantasies, his yearnings. The stories are theirs, but they would never exist without this perfect stranger's art. Some stories can be shaped by hand and others cannot. Bill's colors are of the earth. I lean towards sky. His fabulism is credible, my realisms creak. Saturation is my drug and trimming is his. Take it away, pare it down, confront the final human hollow. We work different media with different hearts, but the work is strengthened and embedded. My vision nicked and flecked by his, cracked and glued, called into doubt and argued back. And maybe were he writing this, he would say something of the same about me. This, I think, is not just the condition of living with an artist. It is the artist's essential condition. to be startled, to be shattered, to be re-instructed, to be redirected, to seek out the thing you could not find yourself, and then by accepting, by contesting, to stumble straight past and then beyond your own constricting imagination. You don't have to live with an artist to experience the shattering of another artist's vision. You only have to want the dialogue. You have to want to take the work of others as seriously as you take your own, value others as you value yourself, give time to extensions and tangents. You have to allow for different possibilities. You have to look for and then absorb that song, that canvas, that garden, as if it were the thing you made, or the thing you might have made, or the thing that might teach you about you, what you are making. 5 minutes, 5 sentences, find your true story in a perfect stranger's art. Sometimes I watch my husband take a photograph. I stand in the light beside him, study the scene beyond him, watch him bend and snap, and still later will be undone by the slice of time he froze. How is it that I didn't quite see it? Or I will tell him all that I know about a character I've written, and his resulting sketch will somehow be steeped with every indicating word, while resembling nothing that I've conjured. By thinking hard about how this artist sees, I learn more about my own seeing. I change the conversation that I am having, not just with him, but with myself. Do you remember those old watercolors I asked Bill the other day? The first ones, the watercolors of West Philly. He went out to the shed where some of his work now gets done, on an easel, in a shadow box, in a kiln, and returned with a black portfolio that had been veiled by all these years of dust. He unzipped the thing, and there they were, the first fantasies as I remembered them, the witness of the hands I didn't resist, the names of the colors that sounded to me then like the strains of a subway guitar. Alizarin crimson, Payne's gray, purple madder, manganese blue. Just a few more images. It's Marfa, Texas. And that is right down the street from us. The Devon Horse Show, where Bruce Springsteen sometimes comes to watch, or would come to watch his daughter ride. So thank you for listening to that. I'm going to stop sharing so we can all get on the screen together. Um, and I just wanted to say a little bit more about collaboration. I met Bill. My great uncle was a famous architect. He designed the Waldorf Astoria, the Pierre, the Boca Raton, um, many, many buildings. And he influenced me deeply as a child. When we went to visit him, there was this huge mural, wall to wall, it stretched, an oil painting he had made of all the paintings that he had done. He had studied at the Beaux-Arts. He was a famous teacher. And I knew I wanted to grow up and marry an architect. It was just this, there couldn't be anything more interesting than marrying an architect. Um, and so I got a degree in the history and sociology of science from Penn, but immediately went to work for an architecture firm as a writer and marketing coordinator, and met Bill um, over the course of that summer, right before he was headed to Yale. We got married 2 years after he, he went to Yale for 2 years, and just a few weeks after he came back, we got married. We have been collaborating on art, but mostly on life ever since. And the fact that he works in multiple media, and the fact that I work, I began writing poetry and then essays and short stories and memoir, and, coming back to all different kinds of forms, has created a sort of fluidity in our language, in what matters to us, in what we talk about and what we think about. And that's been reflected in the kind of work we've done. He has, as I mentioned, you saw some photographs from the memoir, Ghosts in the Gardens. It was the fifth book that I published. He took all the photographs for this book, and it's reflections on endings, beginnings, and the unearthing self. And Mary Simon has been there. I've taught a couple of workshops there at Chanticleer. And this was me with my fifth book saying, there will be no more books. I've come to the end. And of course, that didn't quite work out the way it might have. But Bill's also illustrated, this Simon and Schuster book, Wild Blues, which has a young boy who's a Salvadoran artist at its heart. And so Bill's art is here as if it were the boy who'd made it. And also Bill's stories are here. My third memoir was about El Salvador, and it was me kind of bending into his world and trying to understand it. He obviously illustrated Wife, Daughter, Self. He illustrated Cloud Hopper. You saw a lot of the black and white sketches that you saw are from Cloud Hopper. And then we created together a book of his drawings. You saw some of them. It's a journal. And then Bill, sometimes I lead and sometimes he leads. And so in this case, he put together all of the images in the order he wanted them. And I wrote poems for some pages that I hope feel like prompts. So you saw this in the greens and the color, but it's one of my favorite images. Um, he calls it his broccoli tree. I think of it as asparagus or as a bouquet of flowers. And the line next to it is very simple. And again, hoping it will work as a prompt. You never brought me the right presents on purpose. It's like you brought me a bouquet of broccoli. Um, and this lady that you saw, sometimes a bird sings in the language of memory, and that is the start of a poem. So we're always thinking about intersections. And we also, as I mentioned, and Julie, Mary, and some of the others of we've created, first we created juncture, I guess is the way, the order was that we created juncture first. And it was the idea of juncture, and I write about this in Wife, Daughter, Self, was Bill had worked for architecture firms, and then we had collaborated. I had always had sort of a freelance business from the age of 27 or 28. I had been working for pharmaceutical companies and real estate companies, architecture companies. And then at one point, Bill joined me and we did big corporate books, websites. He would do the illustrations. I would do the writing and the strategic work. But we'd reached a place that we were looking ahead and we didn't know what was going to make us happy in this next, perhaps last chapter. And we decided that we wanted to build small communities of meaning and purpose, and to build that around memoir, because memoir is not just something that you write and you publish, but memoir is a way of thinking about life. And we wanted to think about life with special people in special places. And the first place, and I write about this, as I said in the book, that we choose is this farm. And it's a glorious farm, a Civil War farm. It's perfect. It has all these little buildings that are set up, dragged there from other previous purposes. And we arrive, we have these people who are going to join us. I have 10 hours a day of instruction, thick binders. And when we pull up, we're told by the woman, Sally, who owns the farm, we were just going to cancel this. We're in the middle of a huge drought. And we were like, oh my goodness, people were flying in from around the world. And so we all, perfect strangers, made do around Sally's gorgeous table. She cooked us every meal. And we lived that drought together. And I worried so deeply through it. And it was just beautiful. The relationships remain to this day. The feeling of that farm will always be in my blood. And then we went to the sea, as Julie knows, Cape May, and we went to a river town, and you saw some of those photographs of French Town where that fog was. And we did several 5-day workshops there. As we grew this small but potent and beautiful community of writers and thinkers, we also began to make these resources for them, like Tell the Truth and Make It Matter. And our desire to collaborate lives on in everything we do. I've started to make these blank books, um, and I had wanted to letterpress them. I was telling Christy yesterday, we don't have the room or the budget or storage space, nothing to do actual letterpressing. And Bill has just jumped into this and solved this problem. We have this little, it feels like a toy. I told Bill today, it's like that Easy Bake, I think it was called, when you were a little girl and you're making things and cookies come out of this little thing. It's like that, what we have. And we have polymer plates, and I write small pieces of poems, and Bill designs them typographically, and they come back, and we're starting to ink them. And with laser, these are small little books you can't really see, but they're maybe you can see on this one. This is a bigger one. This one just has the one punctuation mark, and then I'm painting. I'm doing a lot of painting, and then a lot of binding, and these will have an increasing array of lines that in the journal way are hopefully going to prompt those who have them. And this came out of my obsession with Virginia Woolf, but it also, and this is the last thing I'll say before we open this to questions, in case you were wondering if I'm going to talk nonstop. My father, who is the central piece of this book, passed away in August. Quite suddenly after a long decline. His death was rapid, and of course I hadn't been able to be in the same room with him for a long time. And they called me in the middle of the night. I was asleep, the phone was downstairs. The fact that I heard it is a miracle. They told me they were not clear at all about what was going on with him. They asked me something. I didn't have medical authority, so I had to call my brother. And all this time is going by. And meanwhile, I finally said, because I was so used to them saying, you're not allowed to come near your father, I said, am I allowed to go? And they said, yes, which told me that it was the end, of course. And so Bill and I rushed through a very stormy night and got there within 45 minutes of his passing. It was quite haunting and sad, and we've all lost so much this year, and life is full of losses, and it's also full of love. And I wanted to honor my father by making something for everybody who'd been in his life. And so that's where this small, paper and thread and small forms began. And I ended up making about 125 miniature books, and mailing them to people in his life, like his college, his fraternity brother, Bart Pilcher, and someone who knew him from his first job. And he had been very active in his church. And then many, many, many of my friends knew my dad. Mary, anybody who had gone to any of my book launches had met my dad. He was always there. He was the launch. He was who everybody wanted to see. And so the making of things and sending them to others in honor of my father and his friends and his connections was the beginning of this obsession I have with the making of bigger books and more complex forms. And Bill has been enormously helpful in that. So with that, I'd love to hear your questions. Perhaps some of you are collaborating with artists or would like to. I do work with other artists and picture books like Amy June Bates. This just got a really nice Kirkus and then a really nice Publishers Weekly yesterday. This is illustrated by the phenomenal Amy June Bates. We are so lucky. This is just a stunning book. She loved, and it's N.C. Wyatt's daughter, Henriette, and Amy June loved N.C. Wyatt so much that she named her son for him. Who knew? The editor didn't know that when she reached out. She just really liked her style. And so it was an incredible collaboration. I'm working with Chloe Bistro, who is she does a lot for Hollywood. look her up. She's amazing. On an Ursula Nordstrom book. I'm working with the great Italian illustrator in what perhaps will be his last book, Roberto Innocenti. Melody Stacy is working on a William Morris book, and then I have a Virginia Woolf book coming out that I haven't yet seen the illustrations for, but I'm having a wonderful conversation with the artist. So I've been so lucky to collaborate with Bill and so lucky to collaborate with others, and publishing a book is a collaboration, of course. And Laura Stanfill is also like an artist that I collaborated with. So I wanted to talk about collaboration today because I think that too many times authors go out there and they read their books and they answer their questions, but really we're all shaped and sheltered by others. And whether or not we have an artist in the family, whether or not we're married, whether or not we have a partner, we have friends, we have others, and the collaborations that we live will influence the work that we do. So with that said, I would love to answer any questions.
Thank you, Beth. Just kind of soaking all that in. If you have a question, just drop your name in the chat and we'll just kind of go down the list. And I can get things started. So I'm glad that you brought up the retreat. That's one of my favorite chapters. The a shelter for the truth. And what I really, one of the quotes or the sections that I really like about it that you touch on and what you just talked about is you write, use your imagination as an arrow hurtling back toward what might have been or will never be. Use the distance between the facts and your yearning to change those facts as your personal redemption. Meander within the space of insufficient evidence. And I think that's what you're talking about. There are certain things about our stories that we can't, like you're saying, you can't put it into words. Or it's just difficult to put into words. And the only way to get there is, exploring other avenues of creativity. I think that's why I enjoy watching you work and watching your projects unfold, because I really connect with that idea of, it just feels good to create something.
Yes.
And, if I'm not able to write, I'll sit and I'll knit, and maybe it's just this simple dish rag, but it feels good to create something. And so yeah, that whole idea of meandering within the space of insufficient evidence, you bring art into that work one way or another, and you never know. You never know.
I was telling Christy before we all got on, and Carolyn, I see you there. This book is already out in the UK. You must get it. It's called A Ghost in the Throat. And I can't pronounce the Irish writer's name, or I would. But this is the art of meandering in the space of insufficient evidence, this book. It is an Irish poet who has, 4 children. She's 36, she has 4 young children and a husband. Hoovering, all that, just her life is all these domestic chores. And her obsession is this Irish poet of the late 1700s who wrote a poem about her murdered husband. And the poem gets passed, translated, passed down, translated, passed down. And the author of this book is 11 years old when she first hears it. And then she's a little older. And then it becomes just this vibrant chord within her. And she wants to know everything about the 17th, this woman, and she can't find where she's buried. She can't find a lot about her. It's a lot about the vanishing of women over time. And yet she, wherever she can't see or know, she creates this space around the possibility for who this woman was. And while she creates that space, it's memoir as well, because she's showing us how she creates the space, where she goes to imagine, what she does with a road that has none of the remnants of this woman's life in it, none of the artifacts, and she bends her life into the obsession. Carolyn knows I've been talking about obsession vessels is something that I've been thinking about lately. I think of obsession vessel memoirs. This is the purest I've ever seen. It's better than Mark Doty's What is the Grass, where he tangles with Walt Whitman. It's the Jen Chaplin book with Carson McCullers. There's and of course, this is what I do with Henriette Wyeth in the book, where I am so obsessed with her and I'm unable to figure out who I am. I have spent so much time in my life serving others, which is similar to this other memoir. Maybe it's why this woman, she has 4 children. Um, that when it comes to trying to define who I am, do we do that through labels? Do we do that through memory? Do we do that what if I had been? Who are we? Is the real quest of this book when we're alone, when we're with others, etc. At one point, I decide I can't figure out who I am, but I feel so close to Henriette Wyeth, N.C. Wyeth's oldest daughter, Andrew Wyeth's sister. Why do I feel so close? Yes, she was obsessed with F. Scott Fitzgerald because he lived near them for a while, and I was obsessed. Paul Horgan was her best friend. He played a very big role in the Richard trilogy. Paul Horgan's Richard trilogy is extraordinary. So many of his books are extraordinary. She kind of looked like me. She had an interesting relationship with her father. She felt like she was invisible. She had to make decisions. Her husband, Henriette's husband, decides after he has been in Chadds Ford, where Henriette grew up, taking art lessons from N.C. Wyeth. Then he gets married to Henriette, and then he announces, well, it doesn't work quite like that, but close, that he really is going to go back to San Patricio, New Mexico, and and live there. So you can come if you want. He starts out in Roswell, where he grew up, New Mexico, and then for many years, Henriette and Peter Hurd go back and forth about who owns the right to which landscape, because Chadds Ford inspires Henriette's work. New Mexico in the South, in the Southwest, it inspires Peter Hurd. And so all of those questions about dominion, my husband's Salvadoran and I'm here, and he would have been a very different person if he'd had an adulthood there. And if I had joined him, if we had decided to go to El Salvador as a couple, who would I have been? And so I in Wife, Daughter, Self, am looking at other people, trying to understand myself through Henriette Wyeth. I got onto that whole thing because A Ghost in the Throat is like that. And these books that I'm finding exciting are like that, where the memoirist doesn't simply talk about her life, but what her life tangles with. And that can be Paris, Carolyn, or that can be an object, or it can be a person. But I'm finding that memoir that doesn't have that multidimensional nature to it is not memoir that I'm inclined to read. So a very long-winded, tangentially oriented response to you, Christy.
And I love all of that. I've been writing down the titles of the books that you've mentioned and the different artists. What her life tangles with. I really like that. And again, the chat's open if you want to ask questions. I'm just going to keep talking because I'm excited to have these conversations, but pop in whenever you want to. Um, yeah, I'm just thinking about that. Only from a personal level, I have, writing to understand ourselves. And I have this dream of trying to piece together some sort of project around my mother. She's been gone a long time. She was an artist, very quietly, never sold her work or anything, but she has different, it's interesting, she has different styles of art and she signs them differently according to whatever phase of life she was in. And I'm fascinated by that. And so, I really want to figure out more about that, but there's so many questions I can't ever get answers to. And it's
Yeah.
So that question is really interesting, and what her life tangles with. I think that gives an in sometimes to, yeah, writing
I'm
about her.
excited for you to read this book, A Ghost in the Throat, because she gives herself such license to fill in the gaps, but she always tells you when she is. And you know that her own life, when she's reporting on it, is true. And you know when she is telling you what she's imagining and what she knows, these few things that she knows about this woman who obsesses her, her work that obsesses her. And so I've always said, that memoir is, it requires the facts, but it requires the imagination. But you also can't lie, and you also have to still tell the truth. And so you have to find ways to um, to leave signifiers for your readers. This is where my imagination is taking me. This is, it's the same way Terry Tempest Williams, Christie with, um, When Women Were Birds. I'm going to imagine some parts, but I'm going to tell you what I'm imagining, and I'm going to tell you what I know. And so that's all fair. That's all fair in memoir. What's not fair in memoir is if you do all the imagining, but you don't tell the reader that you've done the imagining. That's where you should be just writing autofiction.
Thank you. I see, Julie, you've got a question. Would you like to ask directly? You certainly
Yes, I
can.
want to hear her voice. She was one of our greats. Unmute.
There we
Yeah.
go. That's better. Hello, Beth. It's so
Hello,
good to
you.
see you and everybody else who's here. So, having read many of your different works, I am wondering about how you find the rhythm of each of the books, because there's such musicality in each of the narrator's voices from your books. And I'm wondering the stops and starts. How do you go about finding where you're going to dive in and what it's going to sound like in your ear? Because I
It's
think
such a Julie question, such a great question. And it's probably the most important thing to me. Um, because I don't believe that there's story without rhythm. And that may put me in the minority. That's not going to get you on the bestseller list, but it's, I am not ready to commit to putting anything down on the page until it feels like it's in the hollow of my bones. So I take a lot of walks, and I'm always trying to listen for that first sentence, that first rhythm. And every single one of my books has begun that way, with a walking down a hill 35 minutes in, not really thinking about anything, not planning to write anything, where first it comes into me as a rhythm, and then I start to put syllables and sounds to it, and then it begins to have some logic or reason, and then I think, oh, if it's fiction, she is this, or you know every single one of these first sentences, like Cloud Hopper, it's everyone has a name and I have a name, but what I have, which is extra, is a namesake. The minute you get that rhythm, the character for me is formed. I just have these two books here, so I've got Wild Blues, and it actually the first line that I wrote, it becomes the second sentence in section 2, only because the first chapter had always lived in the back of the book, but we brought it forward. But the first thing that I wrote for this book was, my uncle was wild beauty in motion, and I was the one who knew. You couldn't trench a fence around him, couldn't box him with a frame. He was in and out, there and here, a blaze of day-glow glory. He loved me best, he told me so. Well, once you have that, and it's just, Julie, what I feel, it comes from whatever weirdness makes me, and I recognize that it's weird. It is also constraining because it makes it. Bill has asked me 1,000 times, why can't you just write like like a normal book, like a book that more than 5 people will buy, and it. I don't know how. It's not about being prejudiced against one kind of book or another. I just don't physiologically have it. I have tried to write books that would be more successful, I guess, commercially. And I I can't find my way in. They don't make sense to me. The character never becomes alive. So it's just about being so full of it, full of it, rich with it. Which is to say that there are months and months go by when I don't write anything except for essays sometimes, and sometimes even the essays go stale for me. So now I haven't for a while written any um, essays. I mean, they're coming out, but I wrote them a little while ago. Um, I don't know what I'll write next. I really like this metaphor, the blank books that I'm working on. So thank you for that question. And I know you're such a rhythmic, lyrical writer too. Julie and Carolyn, I wish you could meet each other. Um, you're both, we're so lucky with Juncture Workshops because we've met such remarkable people. And although that long, Shelter for the Truth is about the farm, the first farm, there's so many people who have come into our lives since that have, when we're not making art, we feel like we have made a community. And that goes back to the Katrina Kennison that I referenced earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Carolyn.
Hi. This is all fabulous. Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Christy. Guess I have a question. I love what you said about the ghost in the throat, which I will try to find immediately here in England and the UK. I just pulled off my shelf Beth's fabulous memoir, Still Love in Strange Places.
God, how did you get a copy of that?
I have it. I love this memoir, and it was like 20 years ago. It was 2002, according to my copy. But I just love this, and I was really taken by what you just said, Beth, about Henriette Wyeth, whom I don't know anything about this thing about her husband having said, "Oh, by the way, New Mexico," because my husband kind of said, "By the way, Australia," and I was like, "Oh, really?" And since you wrote this 20 years ago, I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts today about, this versus now and memoir and how you might.
I love, first of all, that book that you're holding in your hand is one of the most, the copy editing on that book, something terrible happened. So Carolyn, you're so precise. Who knows what happened between and Doug, would never let this happen.
Notice.
He's a public, oh God. There was even a place where they took a paragraph, I think, from one page, and it was like 4 pages back. And so you're like this. So that said, I really love that book. That book was 15 years in the making. It was a novel for many years before it became a memoir. That book is still very true. That book, it's so funny you ask, Carolyn, because Bill and I just this morning were talking about whether, as a Salvadoran, born there, his father, Filipino American, spoke only English to him. This is for others who haven't read it. His mother, Italian Salvadoran, spoke only Spanish. So he grew up like that. He has no Spanish accent. He went to college in the States. And we were talking about whether he feels culturally American now or culturally Salvadoran. And he was talking about what he carries forward from El Salvador versus how he lives and sees the world now, and what even going to Whole Foods, does versus the marketplace in El Salvador. But that book, despite all of its typos that Doug would never let happen, is extremely important to me. It was my gesture toward that family. Everything in that book still is true. I haven't in my head gone back and thought, oh, you got that wrong, or you didn't see that right. And that's all these years later, with all these different encounters with his family and other trips taken to El Salvador. It's not a book I feel the need to rush to correct. And so, except for the copy editing. So that makes me happy. And that book was in some ways my gift to his family and his family's gift to me, because they had to spend a lot of time telling me their stories in order for me to write it.
Thank you for that. And just for those others on the call, if they haven't read it, it's just I didn't really notice the copy edits, which is funny because I'm usually so persnickety and I notice, but it's a beautiful memoir and I think it's 20 years old and now you've written another one. I just really inspiring. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you. Thanks for being here. Carolyn is like I don't know, Carolyn, how many of these, this is why I change it every single time so that Carolyn doesn't get bored. Are there any other questions out there?
I did want to ask a little bit more about your husband Bill's artwork and that journal that you held up that was full of his art and what you thought of the writing prompts. Is there a way that, like, where can we find that? Because it sounds wonderful, and I love his art. I think
it
that
is
line,
beautiful.
yeah.
It's it is we so to speak published it just like we published we did a contest. We did an anthology. We created an anthology, and we created this and Tell the Truth, Make It Matter, and then Strike the Empty. And we are working on a new craft book, which incorporates a lot of my thinking through the juncture. We do these juncture workshops, and for those 11, I took all the books off of my shelf, bought a bunch of new ones, and really rethought memoir so that I could teach it new to those who could join us. And there were a lot of new ideas. And I've been writing essays. For example, Craft magazine is going to have a piece, I think it's launching Monday, about how we manage time in memoir. But these are rich with 24 examples and new ideas. And so that the craft book's going to include all those new essays that I'm writing, some essays that I've published in LitHub about writing, and then a series of pieces that I've been doing, some of them inspired by Virginia Woolf's life, about the writer's life and how we live this. It's about envy. It's about sheltering ourselves. It's about feeling barren. So a series of essays like that. So it's 4 parts, and we're at work on that now. And all of that is just on Amazon. It's just a. Although this little journal is in the Wayne Main Point bookstore, but otherwise those are the only places you can get them. But it is beautiful, and Bill took so much time with this. I'd walk into the room where I'm now, which didn't have much furniture then. It has too much now, but he had every drawing that he ever made, not ever made, but that was relevant for this, on the floor. And he was shuffling and moving and shuffling and moving. And then he took them out, then took them upstairs and reshuffled them. It was like a carpet for several days until he figured out which pieces he wanted to keep in what order. And then he said, I want this much blank space between them. I want a short line here. I want something longer here. And then I wrote the poems that went, the poems or the lines. Sometimes it's just like walking the streets in the dark after a storm, looking for life through the lit up glass of other people's stories. And that goes with a man like this. But some are longer, and like they're just my favorite piece of mine is a longer poem. This is a shorter one. I love this drawing of his, but I'll just read. And with that goes, in the white saucer of your car, through the dark we drove, the water wide to our either side, the earth collapsible and folding. And it's this little kid driving his car with his funny hat on. So yeah, that's where that is. And Bill and I are trying to find ways to combine my words and his clay, his art and my books, his typography and my books. So we're trying to build, I don't want to call them products because they're not products, but entities that you can hold in your hand, that are both of our work together in the same place.
Yeah, that takes me back to, Katrina's post and what you were talking about, just making tangible creations.
Yeah.
And yeah, how that,
Yeah.
I don't know, sort of feeds our soul.
Yeah. Doug, you've been sitting over there. What are you thinking in our last 5 minutes?
Just thinking about what you said about collaboration. This is an amazing sort of work you're doing with Bill. and sort of following him through all the changes in his artwork as he tries one medium and then another. How long has he been doing clay now? I remember when he sort of started that.
Well, yeah, clay became, I would say, wow, Doug, I'm very bad at but I think maybe 7 or 8 years. This is the funny thing with Bill, you know, he'll say to me, we're going to learn ballroom dancing and it will be my birthday present. But like Bill is the one who becomes a really good ballroom dancer. And with clay, it was also my birthday present. We're going to go to the Wayne Arts Center and we're going to do clay together. But within 3 lessons, Bill's over the corner. He's already as good as all the teachers. He's making this stuff and I'm still like trying to throw this little thing. And, you know, and then he just, for a long time, I was glazing his, because I do have a good color sense with clay. I was glazing his pieces. The pieces that you saw are not glazed, or they have some oxides on them, but not typical glaze. He now works at home. He has a kiln out there. But the photography of those pieces too, I mean, of all what you saw, I love everything, but I'm mesmerized by the photographs of his clay work with the light and the scallions and the flowers. Are just, to me, incredible. So the clay has taken him, Doug, to new places and has given me a whole different vocabulary too. Every time he moves into something new and I try to learn it and look at him doing it, my vocabulary grows.
You're both great photographers. But are you saying he stages all those photographs
Yes.
of his artwork?
Yeah, he stages them. He built, you know, we are very small time here. Like he built the shadow box. If you would actually see how he photographs these things, you can't believe what comes out because he's, you know, getting an old plank of wood and an old black sheet and, you know, how do I fill in the cracks here? And but he knows exactly what he's doing. It's just that it's very provisional in terms. There's not like ordering from Blick the shadow box. You know, it's all built.
We are nearing the end here, and I've dropped a few links in the chat box for you to check out and bookmark. I'll certainly put a big plug in for the Juncture workshops. I've sat in a few of them. I love those.
No,
So if you get a chance to peruse the website and sign up for any, you won't regret it at all.
Can I
Carolyn.
ask one more question?
Oh, sure, Julie.
Yeah.
Since you do have such a fabulous community, a following, what are your thoughts about gathering again in person?
No, we want to.
Okay.
We
Yay.
we finished we finished the Juncture series, the first one, which was 11, and we do group critiques, as Carolyn knows. And then there's another series that is going to, I think it's 9. It's called Read Write, and I'm taking one short piece that I can send a link to those who sign up ahead of time, and we're looking at things like on being haunted, you know, very specific things that we all have to master for anything we're writing, even if we're writing fiction. But I'm deconstructing those essays. And then in the course of our time together, giving writing prompts, giving the writers a few minutes to write, and those who wish to share the few sentences that they might have developed during that time can. And so it's going to be smaller than the Juncture workshops, which had about 35. These are you know, on purpose, smaller communities of readers and writers. It's going to feel almost like a book club, book talk, very directed, and then some writing and some just talking and building community that way. And when those will finish out early next year, because they're once every 6 weeks or something like that. But we are hoping that in the fall we just dream of having a reunion of some of our favorite, as Nicole Wallace says, some of our favorite friends and, what did she say? Friends and whatever she says. But we'd love to reunite everybody, those who wish to join us.
Great.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Julie. That was going to be my question, because I loved that chapter about the retreat, and that, yeah, it would be wonderful to do something like that again. And so I was wondering the same thing, if you were going to bring that back out.
Yeah, we hope to. You know, we are Doug, I don't know about you, but Bill and I seem to be the last people on the list to get vaccinated in Pennsylvania, so we have no idea when we will emerge as safe people to be around. But we hope to get there with everybody else, get to the other side of this long year.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Christy, thank you so much for creating this community. Your communities are very thriving communities. And on behalf of Christy, I want to tell you all that Dinty Moore is coming up, and he's not someone you want to miss. So check out Christy's website for that.
Well, thanks for being here, Beth. Thanks everybody for joining us this
Thank you. On this
afternoon.
sunny day, I said to Bill, I don't know if I would go inside on this day. It's like air out there. So thank you for coming. And I'm around on social media if you have any questions you want to ask me too. Bye-bye.